Hi there, Joel Baker, Lead Product Coach at Alamode. I'm on the road right now teaching our UAD workshops, and I wanted to take a minute and share with you what we do teach in these workshops for those of you that don't have time to actually come and do the 4-hour class. The class is broken into two major sections. The first section is really what you're about to see right now. It's the theory behind UAD and a little bit of the nitty-gritty of what it's about. The second half of the class that I do in person, these workshops, is really just a 1004. I start with a 1004 and I work through each and every field from top to bottom that has a UAD requirement or guidance. Now that's something you can actually do on your own using what's called Appendix D, which is linked at the bottom of your screen there. So again, for those of you that would like the same material that we teach in our workshops, here it is. You start out with this video and then follow it up by using Appendix D to go field by field and look at every guidance for every UAD field. As always, if you have any questions, you're welcome to email us at training@alamode.com. Enjoy!
Hi everybody, and welcome to the UAD class. This is Joel Baker, Lead Product Coach here at Alamode. With us today we also have Angie Stepp here in the chat window. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask her in the chat window there, and maybe I'll answer them verbally or she'll answer them in the chat window. But feel free to ask questions as we go. We've got people here for that. Got a lot of you in class, so there are probably going to be quite a few questions. Today's class is really broken up into two main sections. The first section is going to be about the UAD itself, the reasons that it's here in the background for. It's actually very important that you understand why UAD is here and how it fits into the overall picture of what your clients are doing. I think it's fantastically important that you understand that, otherwise you won't be able to service your own clients. So we talk about UAD. We do talk about the theory behind some of the pieces of it, including the nitty-gritty of, this is how you do your dates and this is how you do your property conditions and all that kind of stuff. But then we jump into the software at the end. I'm going to use Total 2011. Just to understand, those of you that use WinTotal Aurora, our UAD solution is exactly the same. And I'll mention that again when we get there. But again, I'm going to start off by talking about the UAD and why the UAD is actually here in the first place. Which brings me to UMDP. Most of you have probably never heard of the UMDP, which is a shame. This is actually the larger piece, this larger program, of which UAD is but a small piece. UAD is a smaller part of a much larger program, and UMDP stands for Uniform Mortgage Data Program. It's a joint effort by the GSEs to standardize loan delivery and appraisal data. So not just appraisal data, but essentially the loan package that gets delivered to the GSEs. And I think knowing about the UMDP, first and foremost, is just fantastically important to you because, honestly, UAD isn't by itself. Your clients, in addition to having to be UAD compliant, they also have to be fully UMDP compliant as well if they want to sell these loans to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And if you don't understand their process, then you can't help them with it. This is actually, this UMDP thing isn't just small changes for the appraisal industry. This is changes for everybody that's involved here in this mortgage process. And it's in large part a workflow change as well, which we'll see here in a moment. So when I start talking about the GSEs, some of you don't understand what we mean by this. You've probably heard the term several times, but let me just define it. It stands for Government-Sponsored Enterprise or Government-Sponsored Entity. Right now, the GSEs are obviously Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Well, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as most of you probably know, they are not the government. They are not government organizations. They are private corporations with stock and shareholders, and they're responsible to their shareholders. But they're set up in such a way that when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac make money, the shareholders benefit and they profit. But when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac lose money, as we've all seen from the recent unpleasantness, then the government steps in and funds Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So the profits are privatized and the losses are socialized. And what happened is, using my money and your money, the federal government came in and subsidized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to keep them afloat in the secondary market. And we've all seen that. And what happened is Congress stepped in and created a regulatory agency, for lack of a better term here, called the FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which that part actually being the government, they directed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to create this UMDP program to standardize the loan packages that are delivered to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And the primary purpose of this UMDP, this is what Fannie and Freddie say, it says capture consistent data. Notice it doesn't say capture data consistently, although that is a part of it, as you'll see. Capturing the data consistently is a big part. But the data itself must be consistent, which terms are used, which fields they're used in, not just on the appraisal side, but the loan package itself. The purpose behind that is to drive improved loan quality. This is what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac say, to drive improved loan quality. I imagine, just my own belief here, that that means that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are going to buy fewer and better loans. That's what I read into that. And here is the reason why you and I are here in the first place. This is the reason I'm sitting down here talking to you today and why you're on your computer listening to me. The entire purpose behind this whole program is to help Fannie and Freddie manage their risk effectively. Okay? The FHFA essentially did what I can only describe as an audit on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's books and decided, you folks don't know enough about your loan portfolio. And then they directed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to make this UMDP program to correct that. And so Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac say that you are to help them manage their risk. The way I look at it, folks, as a taxpayer, in the end, it's not really just their risk, is it? I mean, it's yours and my risk. So we're in this together as taxpayers. So this is the purpose of this large program. Let's talk about the pieces of it, the UMDP program itself. There are three main pieces, and the first two that we're going to talk about are actually part of your client's workflow. And you can see UAD is over there. It's not by itself. It does interact with these other pieces. One in particular is very important. We'll talk about that middle piece. But let's start on the left. ULDD stands for Uniform Loan Delivery Dataset. And that, as the GSEs will tell you, leverages the industry standard MISMO XML version 3.0. And a lot of you can think about that as raw data. And I've heard a lot of appraisers, quite honestly, talk about XML. I've heard them talk about MISMO, and I hear the doom and gloom. To be quite honest, this raw data stuff that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac want, this is nothing new to you. Most appraisers have delivered via plugins, right? If you've delivered via Appraisalport or Quantrix or Value IT, or RELS, BCE Emergis, CoreLogic, any of the plugins are designed to give the raw data to the client. All that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have done is just come in and said, all right, this is the new standard that we're going to use for ours. And it's actually, knowing that, it's actually kind of tricky because it might lead you to think that UAD is really just going to use another plugin. But it's much more complicated than that from your client standpoint. It may look to you like it's a plugin, and it might not be for your own workflow very much of a difference. But as you'll see at the very end, when I go and I talk about delivery, you'll see that it's quite a bit different from what your clients are doing. So it's a big workflow change for them. So the ULDD is actually the raw data for the loan itself. That's that piece on the left. The piece in the middle, this UCDP, stands for Uniform Collateral Data Portal. And it's designed to take the data from the loan and run it through a bunch of computers and give it to the GSEs as a finished product. It's designed such that what you deliver to your clients is the same thing that gets delivered to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac on the back end. Okay, what you deliver is what goes to the GSEs. For your clients, though, they're going to use this portal to not just deliver your data, but also their loan data as well. And that's where the XML comes into play. The XML actually goes through the portal. Now, the UMDP is, like I mentioned a moment ago, it's a workflow change for your clients. We have a piece called the Data Courier. I will show this at the end of the class when I go in and I start talking about delivery. It helps your clients manage their XML even if they don't need it immediately. There's a point, I'm going to mention this again in just a few minutes actually, about how some clients say they're not ready for XML. We fully think you should go ahead and deliver in XML now, because even if they don't need it right now, maybe they want to sell that loan 8 months from now to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and they'll be able to use that XML at this point. And we think it's important that you understand how the Data Courier itself actually plugs into your client's workflow. Some of them are used to getting uploads, some of them are used to getting emails with attachments, and a lot of that is going to need to change just organically simply because of the massive amounts of data that's going to come across as XML files. Your clients are going to have to change their workflow in a lot of ways sometimes they don't even realize. So we're going to help you solve some problems for them ahead of time before they even know that they need it. Okay, so background for the UMDP is terribly important to understand how it fits, how the UAD stuff that you're going to do actually fit into the process that your clients go through. Your clients are going to be more likely to work with appraisers who help them solve these needs with the UCDP, with the portal, and of course UMDP as a whole. So UAD is not a program just by itself. It is actually a small piece of a much larger program that you need to know a little bit about, and you need to be able to talk intelligently with your clients about it as well. And we'll talk and come back full circle at the end of the class. Once I show you how to be UAD compliant, when we get to the delivery side, we'll revisit these concepts again. Well, now let's talk about the UAD itself. There are several reasons why UAD is here. First of all, it improves the data integrity related to the home values. That's what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac say. The data integrity is really not just the security of the process of using the portal, but it also, of course, makes sure that the data itself is consistent across the board, such that a term used in Michigan means the same thing as that term used in Florida or Arizona, for instance. The purpose behind this is to strengthen the loan underwriting process and promote a more consistent view and understanding of appraisal data. Again, somebody should be able to pick up a report done in California and read it even if they work in Florida. Support the processes to manage and mitigate risk. We saw this earlier with UMDP, and when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac say to support the processes, they really mean the UMDP as a whole. In other words, and this is really the key for UAD across the board, the GSEs are just looking for more consistency. One of the terms that you'll find that you just flat out can't use a lot of times with UAD is average. What the heck does average mean? There's looks like about 120 of you in this room right now. If I were to ask all of you, all 120 of you, what average means, I'd probably get about 180 different answers. Well, that's because even for the same appraiser, average could mean so many different things. Even in the same report, it could mean average for the age of the property. It could mean average for the condition, average for the builder, average for the neighborhood, average for the whole market area. It can mean essentially whatever you want it to mean. There's no real consistency as to the usage of the word average. And so you'll find in some cases, even in places where UAD says, well, we're not going to give you a list, but you have to write something in here, they will even go so far as to say don't use terms like average in this blank, as you'll see when you get in and look at some of the details in the field by field. So let's take a look at some of the things that UAD itself standardizes. First of all, data formats. This is the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff. This can be as simple as your dates have to be in a particular format, as we'll see, or your currency needs to be rounded to the nearest whole dollar. Something else that folks are very familiar with UAD are the input requirements. In our software, these manifest as pull-down menus, where Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac say choose from these options, there's certain input requirements for certain fields. I want to contrast that with descriptions, because sometimes there will be fields where Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac do not give you a list of things to choose from. They just say, describe such and such in a particular way. An example of this would be the design and style field. Right now, it's typical, especially here in Oklahoma, to see things like conventional or typical or traditional. Some of you are I have found, traveling the country, I've found out that some of you use things like split level or split foyer and things of that nature. But those are no longer allowed in the design and style field. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have come in and said, we want the architectural style, and they give examples, things like colonial, rambler, Victorian, ranch, farmhouse. Those are architectural styles. And so you'll have to change, for a lot of you, you'll have to change what you do in that field. There are not pull-downs, though, for that field. Fannie Mae only tells you how to describe it, and they give you examples of what to do and examples of what not to do. And you just have to know what the parameters are, and it'll change from field to field. That design and style field is just one of them. And the ratings, the condition and quality. I definitely want to spend probably about 10 minutes on these two here in a little bit. I know it's just two fields, but for my money, this is probably the biggest shift in thinking for most appraisers between what you've been doing and what UAD wants. So I definitely want to make sure that we cover those in depth. And there are instructions. Usually the instructions are fairly straightforward. An example would be if you check the PUD box at the top of page 1, you've got to go to the PUD section and check yes or no as to whether the builder is in charge of the HOA. A lot of times the instructions are just fairly straightforward. Most of you are doing that anyway. Sometimes, though, they're different. An example would be DOM. If you don't read the instructions for a field carefully, you might miss the fact that when UAD asks for days on market, they're asking specifically for continuous DOM, not cumulative DOM. They're looking for continuous DOM, meaning that if it's off the market for 1 day, then DOM resets for that property, even if it's just 1 day off the market. So you do need to know the instructions for each field. Some of them are fairly simple, and some of them have what in essence for a lot of you is going to be just a redefinition of some of the terms that you use. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the frequently asked questions. These are the ones that I hear more often than most. Does this mean that appraisers won't be able to write their own comments in certain UAD fields? The answer is, in a lot of cases, yes. Now, sometimes, rather than just having pull downs, you'll be able to sit and describe something rather than just use a pull down menu. We talked about the design and style field a moment ago. But sometimes there are also requirements you can describe only within certain parameters. Sometimes they give you a list of things not to say, for instance. So you just got to know what they are field by field. But yes, UAD is designed in many instances to limit what you can and cannot say in your own words. That is intentionally done that way, but it only affects, as you'll see, it only affects the actual major form. It does not affect necessarily or in any direct way what goes into your addendum. Very common question here. What happens if UAD wants one thing and my client wants another thing in a particular field? Well, I can't be more clear about this. Can't be more plain. If your client wants to sell their loan, it has to be UAD compliant. The appraisal has to be, which means they're going to need to get over that. Now, those of you who are FHA or VA appraisers, you know that the FHA and VA have already announced that they are moving to the UAD standards. So now UAD will, in a lot of cases, obviously trump the old FHA rules for those particular fields. But in other cases, those of you who work for ABC Mortgage or whatever, you're going to have to go and explain to your clients, look, I can do what you ask, but it's not going to be UAD compliant. I'm sure that each and every one of you is going to have that conversation with a client. You will know UAD better than they will. And I think it would be a disservice to not know UAD well enough to be able to spot when the scope of work, comes across and they want such and such in a particular field. You need to be able to look at that and say, well, I can do that, but you won't be able to use my appraisal to sell that loan. That'll still be a business decision that they have to make, obviously. But you need to know UAD well enough to be able to spot those when they come across. Some of them are very simple. That leads into this question. Will every report I write have to be UAD compliant? No. Only the ones that are going to be sold to the GSEs need to be UAD compliant. Those of you who do non-lender work, you can still use the general purpose forms all day long. Or even if you wanted to, though I know a few of you do, technically you could still use the regular old 1004 just the way it exists now. Those of you who have seen the way our UAD solution works, you notice that there's the regular 1004 and the UAD version of the 1004, and there's separate forms in the forms list. So you can still use the old 1004 just the way it has been used previously. All right. Now this is by far the #1 question that I get, and it comes across and pokes up its little head in a lot of fields all over the place, where UAD requires something. You have to fill the field out in a particular way, and doing so, being compliant on the form, you believe that it would appear misleading. Well, you still have to be USPAP compliant. Let me be very clear about this. The GSEs have come out and been about as clear as they could possibly be on this one issue. UAD does not ever trump USPAP. You must still be USPAP compliant. What that means is if you've got something in the report that needs clarification, then clarify in the addendum. You'll need to make use of your addendum. Most of you will probably have an addendum 2 or 3 times the size that it currently is, specifically because of UAD requirements. An example of this is going to be, for a lot of you, will be on the grid. If you think to the basement and square finished, or I'm sorry, the basement and finished rooms below grade, right now for UAD, the GSEs are asking specifically for the square footage of finished basement for everything, including your comps. Now, a lot of you don't have that information. You might be tempted to put nothing into that blank, just to leave it empty, which is not compliant. You have to put a number in that blank. It's a number blank, so you have to put a number in there. Some of you might not have that information. You may guess, and if you guess, then obviously you're going to need to go to the addendum and work on that. I will mention this, that the GSEs use the phrase quite often. They say, in the normal course of business. And what that means to them, I actually got to meet with these folks back in April, and in the normal course of business to them includes getting a hold of the listing realtor to find out this information, or calling the homeowner, or calling the buyer's realtor and finding out pieces of information that you don't know. So keep that in mind. Some of you are going to have this information, some of you aren't. Some of you may need to guess at some of these pieces simply because UAD won't let you leave it, a particular field blank, or you can't write unknown or something in there. You have to put a number in. And if you make up the number, then obviously you're going to want to go to the addendum and talk about it. That's true for a lot of fields, and of course it's going to be which fields you have access to will depend on your market. Which pieces of information that you'll have, maybe in the MLS, maybe you won't be able to get a hold of it. It'll just depend, and your market may vary. So which forms are affected by UAD? Well, there's the 4 of them, 1004 and 2055, and the condo and the condo drive-by. That's it. There are only 4 forms affected by UAD. In particular, that MC form, there are no UAD requirements at the moment. It could be that the GSEs come back in the next few years and create some UAD requirements for other forms. I, for one, would expect maybe the income form, maybe the manufactured form would make sense, I think, and then the MC form as well, to have some UAD requirements. But for right now, you're spared from any further hassle with that MC form. So a little bit of a silver lining there. Just these 4 forms. So whom do you contact for suggestions to or questions about UAD? Well, first of all, you can, if you want to, call us. You can also email training@alamo.com if you've got any questions. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have also set up a hotline for you and also your clients as well. I hear that lenders call this number, so keep this number handy. If your clients have questions about what is or isn't compliant, you are more than welcome, obviously, to give them this number, and they can hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were. All right. And the last question here. My client says they're not ready for XML. Why send it anyway? Well, some clients aren't going to be ready. In fact, a lot of your clients, depending on when you're watching this, and I know we're recording today, some of you are going to be delivering to clients that aren't ready now. Some of them say they're not going to be ready for 3 or 4 months. But what happens in 8 months or 12 months or 18 months down the road when they decide that they want to sell this loan package to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? If they don't have the XML, then they're going to have to essentially pay to have that PDF converted. It'll be an actual a process that they're going to pay a company to convert the PDF to the raw data format. But if you use the data courier, which is built into our UAD solution, what you can do is right now you can give them both. You essentially say, look, client, I don't know which one you're ready for, but Here's an email. Click here to download the PDF. Click here to download the XML. And your client gets to choose which one that they're ready to use at the moment. They can keep that email if they want to, and then several months from now come back and get the XML later on, and you won't have to re-deliver that report to them. So our suggestion is obviously go ahead and give them more than what they're looking for now, because their process is going to change over the next year as they become UMDP compliant. And if they're not ready now for that XML, then they will probably be ready certainly within the next year. And you won't have to re-deliver it to them, and they won't have to pay for another appraiser to come back and do that appraisal again on that particular property, just to be UAD or XML ready, depending on what has or hasn't been done with it. So keep that in mind. You're going to want to use Data Courier whenever possible. I'll show that process at the very end. On your part, it's very easy. So we'll talk about that at the end. Okay, hang with me for just a moment. We're going to give some examples. I want to talk about 3 particular fields and how they have been inconsistent in the past, and give you essentially some reasons why Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are making the changes that they are making for these 3 fields. They did an analysis of about 1.2 million properties, and here are some of the results of those. Now remember, this is Fannie Mae's data, not Alamode's data. I get this straight from Fannie Mae. All right, the quality of construction field. Notice that almost half of all responses really weren't about the quality of construction. They were about the materials that were used in the construction. Now, this tends to be a locational thing I have found. Some of you in one place will do this and some of you not in another. But let's break this out. Let me break out frame and give some examples here. Now, I've been working with appraisers for almost a decade now, and I can kind of guess down here what frame stucco tile average means, but I don't exactly know what frame stucco tile average means. And I could ask all 120 of you what you think it means, and I'd probably get 120, similar, but also not exactly the same answer. And so there's been some inconsistency here. These are just some permutations of the word frame. Another field to look at would be the condition field. And I looked at this initially, and I saw average as 2/3. Almost 2/3 of all responses used the word average, or actually began with the word average, as you'll see. I look at this, and my initial response was, wait, that's the bell curve. Average, that's 63%, 64%, that's the bell curve. But that was the only one that matched. Look at good and fair on either side. They should be roughly equivalent, and they're not. There's a big disparity between the two that are on the other side of average. So then I started digging deeper into the details, and you'll notice that these are just permutations of the term average that are used. I've got some questions for some of these appraisers that use these. For instance, I don't have a clue what average minus superior means, or average old. Average good updated, not a clue there. Average no, you can see some of the problems here. Well, I got up to average fair, and I had a light bulb that went off. I thought to myself, aha, I got it. I had a scenario in my head where the appraiser wanted to put fair into the blank, but the client called back and said, we can't underwrite for fair. So the appraiser rolled their eyes and put an average fair into the blank, still adjusted the way they needed to, went to the addendum and talked about what average fair meant to them, but in the end, average fair is what was actually in the blank there in the grid. I know some of you I can see by your comments, some of you find this amusing, and to me it's worth a chuckle or two. But my point here is not to poke fun necessarily. It's basically to show you folks weren't trying to be inconsistent or obtuse. You weren't trying to obfuscate the situation at all. You were making your own business decisions, trying to make your own clients happy so that you could make money. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, one of the silver linings about UAD, if you choose to look at it this way, it's this. It's not just that the GSEs are shoehorning you into choosing only one of 6 items for the condition field. They are also requiring your clients to accept them as well. So there is a little bit of a silver lining there for the condition ratings. It does make the quality and condition fields a little bit more easy in some sense, simply because of the nature of the relationship between you and some of your clients. We'll talk more about them when we talk about what's required for those fields. The third example I wanted to give was the location field here. And notice these don't add up to 100% here, right? In fact, it's quite common for the location field to contain the subdivision name. A lot of appraisers out here, I'm from Oklahoma, and a lot of my buddies out here, they use subdivision name and then adjust based on subdivision name there. But that's not what the GSEs want. They want certain types of things. They want to know specifically how does location affect the marketability of the property, and they give you certain terms that you need to use. We give those to you in a pull-down menu in the software, as you'll see. But those three fields are three examples of some of the inconsistencies that UAD is designed specifically to eliminate. All right, let's take a look at the nitty-gritty here and start getting into talking about what UAD does require. We'll start with the easy stuff, your dates. Your dates now have to be in this format. So your September 1st date of this year would then be written 09/01/2011. For those fields that have years only, like your taxes year field or the year built, 4 digits only allowed in that field. So for instance, you would put in 2011, not 11. Now, with every good rule, there must always be an exception, right? And your exception to the date rule is at the date of sale in the grid. Those of you who know that particular field, for UAD, you'll notice that when you get in there, sometimes you are putting in the expire date, sometimes the withdrawal date, sometimes the contract date, the settlement date. It just depends on if it's a listing or what type of sale or what pieces of information you do and don't have, whether you know the contract date or not, sort of, check boxes here and there. The software will help you fill that out, but your date, when you put the dates in for that date of sale, need to be this particular format. So if you had a contract date of April of 11, you would put in 04/11. They do that so that you can fit multiple dates into the date of sale field. It is a what we call a repurposed field, meaning that it answers a question that is at least somewhat different from what's on the form itself. Your price and your values, generally currency and in whole numbers, so round. The software will help you do that. The exception to that rule is going to be your price per square footage. Your currency, you need to go to 2 decimal places, which means that $125 would be written as 125.00. An example of rounding here, notice from the 203.56 I've rounded up. Notice your price per square foot, you go to pennies. But look at this. You'll notice something is actually missing from the beginning of these numbers. You do not add your own dollar sign unless otherwise stated to do so in your price or your values field. The example here is your price of prior sale at the bottom of the grid. That's going to be your exception to that rule. Other requirements. Numbers. Generally, your numbers fields need to be numeric. So in a lot of cases, you'll notice that UAD says don't leave it blank, put in 0. Well, you can't write out none. You would have to actually put in 0 because it's asking for a number. 0 is technically a number. Your percentages. No decimal point. So if any of you were doing 44.68% finished basement, then you've got to knock that off. You got to round. Your age, you can go up to 3 digits. Notice it is, of course, since it's a numbers field, it's numbers only. So those of you who used to write for new construction, you would write new or new const or new const or something in that field. Now you would probably write 0 because it is a new construction. Or if it's those of you who would write 1Y 2M for 1 year 2 months, of course you would now just put the number 1 in that blank. So your age is numbers only at this point. When you go to put in your acres, numeric, go to 2 decimal places. Your square footage, round to the nearest whole square foot. And your days on market have to be actual days. So when UAD asks for DOM, you need to actually fill in the number of days. Don't say 4M or 4MO for 4 months. That's not a UAD compliant response anymore. You have to actually break open a calendar and figure out how many calendar days that was on the market. Your bathroom count. Some of you have been doing this. Most of you probably haven't. We certainly didn't do much of this here in Oklahoma. It's the number of full in a period, the number of half baths. So for example, 2 full 1 half would be 2.1. An example of 2 full 2 half would be 2.2. 2 full 3 half would be 2.3, and so forth. But it's a representational count, obviously. It's not a numeric count. And you've always got to have a number on the left and a period and a number on the right. Those of you who do quarter baths, you do not count your quarter baths anymore. Now, just because you don't count them doesn't mean you can't adjust for them. This just means that you can't put them in the count. Also, you are supposed to count 3 quarter baths as full, those of you who do 3 quarter baths. Here in Oklahoma, we do that quite often. Usually means that there's a shower but no tub. Well, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are saying to go ahead and count that as a full bath. So, for instance, if you something where beforehand you would have said 1 full 1 3/4, now it's going to be 2.0 because you're rounding up that 3/4 bath. And notice it's not just the number 2, it's 2.0. It's representational. Number on the left, then a period, then a number on the right. Okay, your abbreviations. There is a list. You'll see it in the software. I'll show it here in a little bit. I'm not going to break that out for you right now. There's a better place to show that and talk about it. Use the standard set of abbreviations if you're going to abbreviate a term, just check your list and make sure that there isn't a UAD guidance for that particular abbreviation for that term. If there is, you've got to use it. But say, for instance, you want to abbreviate railroad tracks. At the moment, that is not a prescribed abbreviation. So you can abbreviate that however you want to. Just make sure and put that into an addendum. Okay, let's talk about rating property condition and quality of construction. I mentioned earlier that these particular fields are, for my money, the biggest change in the way that appraisers think about filling out the forms. And I want to point out some particular things here as we go through. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on each one of these. I'm going to go through them one at a time, point out some things. Maybe if those of you who are taking notes, you want to write down or circle if you've got a printed list of these. Your job is essentially to choose which of these definitions that your property most closely matches. You're not being asked at the moment. You're not giving, this house gets 5 stars and that house gets 3 stars. It's not that at all. Actually, each one of these has its own definition, and you're going to match your property that you're looking at against the definition. Some of the terms and parts of the definition do not apply to all properties. Especially, you'll notice when you get to your comparables. You may or may not know anything about the interior of your comparables. You may have to make a guess, and a lot of times actually there will be several things in a particular definition that flat out don't apply to a particular property. So keep that in mind as you go through. You're going to pick the one it most closely matches. What that means is if you've got a property that has some things in common with C3, some things in common with C4, it's still your opinion as to which one it most closely matches. Let's take a look here at C1. This is essentially, those of you who are reading this, it's basically new construction. No physical depreciation. Now, of course, the notes here, and by the way, this is not my text at all. This is part of the definition of C1. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac give you 2 what-ifs to help you out here. We don't see a lot of this in Oklahoma, but apparently it's fairly common in California to use recycled or remanufactured or rehabilitated components. Well, you can do that. You can use, take a house that's used rehabilitated, remanufactured, or recycled components as long as they are A, in like new condition, and B, are on a 100% new foundation. Then, if you want to, you can call it a C1. Otherwise, if it's not on that 100% new foundation, then you can't call it a C1. On the flip side of that, it says recently constructed improvements or houses that have not been previously occupied are not considered new if they've suffered from significant physical depreciation because they've been on the market for so long and have sat unoccupied and have suffered from inadequate maintenance or upkeep, essentially. And that'll be obviously your decision as to how that particular house stacks up. Contrast that with C2. No deferred maintenance, little or no physical depreciation, and requires no repairs. Virtually everything is recently repaired, refinished, or rehabilitated. Look at that last sentence. Dwellings in this category either are almost new or have been recently completely renovated and are similar in condition to new construction. Well, I'll go into a little bit more depth here in just a moment. Let's move on and I'll point out a few other things. Notice under C3, improvements are well maintained. In fact, they use the phrase well maintained twice in this definition. Notice they say limited physical depreciation due to normal wear and tear. Well, let me contrast that with C4, which says some minor deferred maintenance and physical deterioration due to normal wear and tear. Well, what's the difference between C3's limited and C4's some minor? Well, the difference is whatever the heck you think it is. There's a little bit of wiggle room in each of these, sometimes not much. All right, let's take a look at C4 and what it says. Notice that they use the term adequately 3 times in this definition. I was so happy, folks, when I first read the definitions for these. I was like, oh, this is easy. Adequately 3 times here. They've managed to say what word without saying what word. Seriously, are any of you thinking the same thing that I was thinking at the time? Type into the chat window. What word have they managed to say without actually saying it in this definition here? Tom got it right there. Yes. Yes. Okay, several of you are, see, I think a lot like you folks do. And that my initial reaction to this was, this is easy. They managed to say average without actually saying average. And I was so excited because, great, now I know how to teach this. If C4 is average, then C5 is fair, C6 is poor, C3 is above average, C2 is good, and C1 is excellent. And I washed my hands. I was like, great, that's easy, I can move on. But then I got to thinking, and I got to reading the definitions more, and I started applying them in my head to certain properties that I knew. And I realized that depending on where I am and how I want to use the word average, heck, even in the same market area, in a particular neighborhood, I could definitely use average as a C2 for almost new properties. Whereas just across the street, same market area, I might be able to do a C3 or a C4 for some of those properties as well. And if you're an appraiser, you'll recognize the fact that you can squeeze average into probably 3 or 4 of these, just depending on what you mean by the word average. And it became clear to me very quickly that this is why average isn't used. Because average is a non-term. It's a non-starter. It doesn't really mean anything. It means whatever you want it to mean. And so that's why the definitions are here, and that's why the definitions themselves don't use average. In fact, I'm going to put the nail in the coffin for the word average here in a little bit. You'll see if you'll hang tight with me once we get through quality of construction. I'll circle back and we'll talk about average again. Let's look at C5. Obvious deferred maintenance, some significant repairs, and the last sentence will help you with this one as well. The functional utility and overall livability is somewhat diminished due to condition, but the dwelling remains usable and functional as a residence. C6. Substantial damage or deferred maintenance with deficiencies or defects severe enough to affect the safety, soundness, or structural integrity of the improvements. Now, so far I have been saying that your job is to choose the one that it most closely matches. So if you've got a property that has a lot in common with C3 and a little bit in common with C4, then you are probably going to rate it as a C3 because it most closely matches C3. But the GSEs have come back in that the FAQ document, which I'm going to show you at the end, they've come back and specified and clarified a particular point here. If you've got a property that has any of this up here at the top, substantial damage or deferred maintenance with deficiencies or defects severe enough to affect the safety, soundness, or structural integrity of the improvements. If property has one thing in common with that, one thing of substantial damage or deferred maintenance, then the entire property must be a C6. What that means is if you've got a brand spanking new property from the foundation up, there's a hole in the roof, gigantic 3-foot hole in the roof. I would count that obviously as substantial damage severe enough to affect blah blah blah. Well, that doesn't mean, obviously if the rest of the house would normally be a C1, but Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have come back and said no, if there's one thing that's a C6, then the whole property is a C6. And it really just revolves around what you consider to be substantial damage or deferred maintenance, how you define that to be. So that's your exception to the rule of how to rank those. Quality of construction here. Same sort of thing, you pick the one it most closely matches, and let's get started with Q1. Here are some words to pay attention to. Usually unique structures, individually designed by an architect. And notice they use the phrase exceptionally high 5 times in this definition. Q2, custom designed for construction on an individual property owner's site, may be found in high quality tract developments, individual plans, highly modified plans. Notice they use the phrase high or very high quality 4 times in this definition. Q3, look right in the middle here. Includes significant exterior ornamentation and interiors that are well finished. The workmanship exceeds acceptable standards and many materials and finishes have been upgraded from stock or builder grade standards. Q4 actually still manages to say the word adequate in here. Standard or modified standard. The design includes adequate fenestration and some exterior ornamentation and interior refinements. Materials, workmanship, finish, and equipment are of stock or builder grade and may feature some upgrades. Q5, dwellings with this quality rating feature economy of construction, basic floor plans, minimal fenestration, basic finishes, minimal, limited, minimum, minimal, inexpensive, limited, all over the place on this definition. And Q6, some may not be suitable for year-round occupancy. Often built with simple plans or without plans, often utilize the lowest quality building materials, often built or expanded by persons who are unskilled or possess only minimal construction skills, plumbing may be non-existent, that sort of thing. And your job is to figure out which one it most closely matches. I'm sure all of you have a smile on your face at the moment thinking of something that you would absolutely rate a Q6. I live in Oklahoma. We've got plenty of those stories hanging around. Now, let's talk for a moment about using average again. Average, by the nature of the word, means that you are mentally comparing one property against another. It falls somewhere and is ranked somehow against other properties. Well, this is what I meant when I was talking earlier about how UAD has changed the way appraisers are supposed to think about certain things. And for these two fields, the condition and the quality fields, you are not to compare one property against another. You don't say, well, I gave my subject a Q3 or and then therefore I have to give because it's a little bit less, I've got to give my comparable a Q4. You can't think in that terms. Or you can't think in terms of, well, this house was for a 1920s house was a Q2. Age has its own blank, folks, and they want you to adjust based on age in another blank. Age should not come into quality. What that means is you can no longer think when doing condition or quality. You can't think in terms of for this neighborhood, ... or for properties of this type, or for properties of this builder, or for properties in this neighborhood, or properties in this market area. You can't really think in terms of that. In fact, to put it even more bluntly, and this is probably going to be quite strange until you get used to the idea. When you come to rate condition or quality, you should pretend in your mind that there are no other properties on the face of planet Earth, and the only thing that you have to go by is the text of the definition itself that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have given you. It either does or it doesn't match the definition. It either is or it isn't a Q2. It is or it isn't a Q4. Again, it's quite a bit different from how most of you are thinking. Now keep in mind this is just the description field in the grid. You can still adjust how you want to adjust. There are no UAD guidance pieces for adjustment for this type of thing. Keep that in mind. You're definitely going to need to change probably the way that you think. Most of you will probably need to change the way that you think when you fill out these fields. It's a bit of a difference. Just remember, don't compare it with any other properties in your mind. Don't rank it one property against another, even properties in the same report. You're comparing a property only against the text that you see, only against the text of the definition. Okay, well, let's actually take a look at the software here. Now I'm showing Total 2011 here. Some of you may be using WinTotal Aurora. The UAD solution works exactly the same, so there's no real difference. Obviously, the program's different, what they offer, but that's not what this class is about. We're going to talk about UAD, and of course, I can show you what you need to know about the software in between 5 and 10 minutes. It's not all that hard. Obviously, knowing the UAD stuff is what's really tough, and that's why this class exists and isn't just 5 or 10 minutes. But I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do this. You'll notice in your contents list there's a new section called Uniform Appraisal Dataset Compliant Forms. And here are your 4 major forms. Here's your definitions addendum. I'm going to pull that up and show that as the first form. And your additional comps, listings, and rentals pages. Now, you'll notice when I go to most common here that there's the 1004 and then the UAD version of it. There's the 2055 and the UAD version of the 2055. There's the condo and the UAD version of the condo form. We did this, and you're going to be able to swap back and forth between them. You can take your template. Those of you that use templates, you can take your template and swap in the UAD version of the 1004. You're probably also going to want to take the definitions addendum, which I'm going to go ahead and show here. We're going to go to that particular form. And I don't know of any regulatory requirement that this need to be in your reports, but I would definitely, just from my standpoint, put this in every UAD report that you do. That way, if your UAD report winds up in the hands of somebody who doesn't understand UAD, say an attorney or a judge, they'll be able to essentially decode what you meant by C3. So there are the definitions, the written out definitions of C1 through C6, Q1 through Q6. There is also the definitions for not updated, updated, and remodeled, which you will need in the condition field of page 1 for the subject. When describing the subject's condition, you'll see you'll need those. There is also an explanation of the bathroom count, because the bathroom count is now different from what a lot of folks are using. It's representational, it's not numeric, and so that requires an explanation. Page 3 of our addendum is actually the list of abbreviations. You don't have to memorize all of these all at once. I do predict that most of you will have most of these memorized by the end of the year anyway, just because you've used them. The ones you need to know right away are AC for acres, scroll down here, SF for square feet, and UNK for unknown. Notice that even down here we've got the ability for you to put in your own abbreviations. Earlier I mentioned that if there is something that you want to abbreviate that doesn't have its own standard abbreviation, you can come in here and do that and just list it in here the way it appears on your forms. Just make sure and put it in your addendum. This is a good place to go and do that. So those of you who do templates, go ahead and add this particular form, this addendum, to your report. Let's jump to page 1 here and talk about some of the new things that are built into our UAD solution. One of the first things you ought to notice are the new colors here, the new purple color. These fields, some of you might want to call them pop-up fields because they look a lot like a pop-up, but they're really dynamic form extensions, which means that, say I were in another field, those of you who use Tab and Enter to navigate your forms, I can just hit the Enter key and go right into them. So they're really just an extension of the form itself. They're not a true dialog window where you're required to click OK and save and cancel. None of that nonsense. So you can do Tab and Enter and Shift Tab and all of that as you navigate through. We tried to stay out of your hair as much as we possibly could. So that's what those purple fields are for. Now, you can't type into a purple field down below. You must interact with the form extension up top. You check your boxes, put in your pieces of information in these fields, and then we will concatenate it all down here at the bottom, put it in with the proper syntax that's necessary. In some cases, we think it would be silly to require you to obviously know exactly what pieces of syntax are required for certain fields. You know, when you use a dash, when you do a semicolon, when you have to put a space between a number and a designator. You don't really need to know all of that all the time. So we take care of that for you as much as we possibly can. Those of you who use quick lists, I've turned mine off here on the side by using the F9 key so that I have more space, but quick lists do work within these form extensions. So some of you may need to recreate your quick lists because these are different fields here in the form extensions, but quick lists do work. In fact, multi-field quick lists obviously still work, so check those out as well. Now, you'll notice when you're in a UAD field, I've clicked into the tax year field, which has UAD guidance. Look in the lower left-hand corner, and you'll notice that it says UAD 4-digit year. This is what we call the NField Guidance. It tells you a little bit about the guidance for that field. Notice the little icon next to it has the question mark. You click the question mark, up pops the full guidance for that field. Obviously, if we were to put the full guidance for every field right on the form, you all would run screaming and never use the product. So we have it accessible with a single click should you need it. In fact, those of you with dual monitors, we put this in a window for you so you could take it and move it off onto your other screen so you can have both the form and the full guidance open at the same time. And in fact, we've worked it such that when you click into another field that's a UAD field, the guidance window will follow along with you. So those of you using dual monitors, that'll be a help for you. So what happens if I put in some bad formatting? Say I put 11 instead of 2011 in the tax year field. When I leave the field, you'll notice that it's bordered in red. This is a subtle visual indicator to you as the appraiser that there may be some formatting problem with this. We call this our real-time validation engine, and it is brand new to UAD and specific to UAD at this point. It warns you that there's a formatting problem. You click back into a field that's been turned red, and you'll notice that the guidance that was in the lower left-hand corner is now right in your face, because we don't think it's necessary that you have to take your eyes all the way down to the lower left corner. We pull it up, put it right in front of you, and tell you what the guidance is. And of course, when you click here, it opens the full guidance window. So it's the same stuff that's down here in the lower left-hand corner. We just make it more accessible up here. You fix it, leave the field, and you're good to go. Let's take a look at the taxes field. You'll notice if I put in 88 cents, well, what would you folks want us to do? Obviously, you got to round, right? Well, you get out of the field, obviously, move to the next field, and we'll go ahead and round for you. There is also an E&O, which is more powerful than that real-time validation engine, and I'll show that here in just a few minutes. Okay, let me go ahead and point out certain things here in the form that you're going to want to know right off the bat. Now, at the end, I'm going to give you links, obviously, to Appendix D, where you can do the field-by-field work. Some of you are wondering, what is in the 4-hour class that I teach? Well, the bulk of that class is actually walking through the 1004 field by field, looking at each one of the requirements. That's a UAD for each of the UAD fields. And I highly recommend that every one of you do that as well. That document is called Appendix D that you will need, and I've got a link for it here later on. But to sort of drive that point home, let me make a few points. For instance, your lender-client field here, you'll notice when you click into that field, your UAD guidance, NField guidance there in the lower left, tells you that this is essentially a repurposed field. You don't ever put the name of the AMC in this lender-client blank. You only put the name of the lender, and you must put the name of the lender. I want to contrast that with, I'm going to go ahead and go to the bottom of page 6 here. I want to contrast that with this blank right here, this first blank, and I'm not talking about these fields. These fields are automatically, these lower 4 ones are populated automatically with the lender's information. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm only talking about this one field right here. This field is where the name of the AMC goes. So if there was an AMC involved in the transaction, you must put the name of the AMC in this field. If there was no AMC involved in the appraisal transaction, then you write out the text no AMC. These are just examples of how you need to know exactly what needs to go in each of these UAD fields. Let me scroll down here and talk about a few more things. Your area and also the site field on the grid as well follows this rule. If it's an acre or more, you report it in acres, and if it's less than an acre, you report it in square footage. Our dimensions field actually calculates this. Remember, those of you who do this, like 209 by 2, let's do 200. That's less than an acre, so it's 41,800 square feet. We'll go ahead and put that information in there for you, put the proper abbreviation and everything. Now, those of you who are wondering, well, can I put irregular in the dimensions field? Notice that when I click into the dimensions field, there is no guidance for that particular field. All right, there is no guidance for the dimensions field, so you can put irregular if you want to. I only show dimensions to show you that it does still auto-populate the area field. The view field. The view and the location field work the same way here, folks. You start by choosing an overall description of the view. Is the view neutral, beneficial, or adverse to the marketability of the property? So you'll choose one or the other. Maybe I'll choose beneficial here. So you choose overall, then you must also choose one factor from the given list. If you choose other, then you must describe what you mean by other here. I'm going to go ahead and choose woods. I can, if I want to, come in and choose a second factor, although you are not required to choose a second factor. But again, if you do choose other, then you are required to describe. That's just a UAD requirement across the board. If you choose other, then you must describe. And here might be where I would put in RRTRX. At the bottom of page 1 in the condition window, you start by choosing an overall C1 through C6. And this is what will transfer to the grid, obviously. Well, if any of the kitchens or bathrooms have been updated in the last 15 years, the GSEs want to know about it, specifically the kitchens and the bathrooms. So if they have not been updated in the last 15 years, you check the box and then move down and talk about your notes down here. If, however, the kitchen and or the bathrooms have been updated in the last 15 years, then you use the pull-down menu and choose not updated, updated, or remodeled, and the date range, less than 1, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and so forth. Your E&O works the same way. You just click on the E&O button wherever it is. It'll pull up your window, and if you double-click on a warning, it will jump you to that particular place in the field. Notice that the address hasn't been standardized for USPS according to Pub 28. Your addresses, we will actually do that for you when you get your location maps. You don't have to worry about that. When you go to deliver your reports, you'll notice that there is a new option here called the Data Courier. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. I'm going to talk about 2 different delivery methods. The first one are the plugins. Those of you who deliver via a plugin Continue to deliver via a plugin unless your client tells you to do something differently. At the moment, some of these plugins are ready. Some of them are not UAD compliant or portal ready or whatever you want to call it. So you just have to follow your client's instructions. The data courier replaces the other delivery methods, including, of course, email delivery. The data courier takes your report, creates a PDF out of it, creates the XML, and then sends both to your client at the same time. It actually delivers them an email with 2 links. Click here to download the PDF, click here to download the XML, and your client will get to choose which one they want. It may be right now they only want the PDF so that they can close the loan, and then when they sell the loan later on down the road, 8 months down the road, they'll come back and they'll get the XML in addition to that. The data courier lets you deliver both formats so that you give the client everything, and they'll be able to use it later on too. So it's important that even though it looks like a plugin here as part of this, in reality what it does is it solves a problem for your client. It gives them more than what some of them are asking for at the moment using the data courier. To be quite honest, it's going to be really difficult for these LOs and these clients, these AMCs, to keep track of all of these XML files. Right now, a lot of what they're doing is they're taking your PDFs and they're printing and creating physical copies, physical hard copies of them, and keeping track of them physically. Well, Outlook is a great tool, folks, but it's not an appraisal management tool. And the Appraisal Data Courier can help your clients keep track of their orders. Those of you who have clients that don't understand UAD, they don't understand UMDP, you can obviously refer them to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or you can refer them to us. Let me go ahead and pull my window up over here. We have training not only for appraisers, but also for lenders and AMCs as well. We're even on the road trying to get AMCs and lenders on the ball, including underwriters as well, obviously, for UAD and UMDP as a whole. So push your clients to contact us to take our classes. Of course, they're free, just like they are for you folks. And in fact, some of your underwriters can also take the Appraisal UAD class, this very class that you all are taking right now. Some of them have found it really helpful. And that's here under training for appraiser, mortgage, agent. They can click on lenders over here if they want to. All right, let me go in to another website here, alamode.com/UAD. There is a frequently asked questions here on this page, and I highly recommend every one of you to click this first link and go to the UMDP page created by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. If you scroll down, you'll notice there's also a piece of UAD information. There are 2 links here that I want each of you to see on this particular page. Number 1 is Appendix D. This is the appraiser-facing document that walks you through step by step, field by field, what the requirements are for each field. There is also, a little bit above that, the FAQ document, and I highly recommend every single appraiser read the FAQ document, end to end. It answers a lot of questions. I think Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have done a fantastic job with their training. My hat is off to them. They've done a great job. Take advantage of all the materials that you can, but the 2 pieces that I highly recommend again are Appendix D and the UAD FAQ. All right, I got some questions here. Let me go ahead and dive in and start getting those. Thanks, Angie, for helping me out there. Let's see. Johnny is asking,